How did you first start making music, and did you just start on software, did you have hardware?
Cut a very long story short. Yeah. I got an older brother, 7 years older. When I was about 12, he got turntables, was into jungle drum and bass. So when he was out, I used to sneak into his room, and obviously try and do it, and he was scared about me breaking his needles and scratching records. So he taught me, and over the years, my intrigue, grew into how the records were made. So I actually started on PlayStation. Music 2000, I don't know if anyone remembers that. And then Music 3000 on PlayStation 2. Started doing stuff on there, mucking around. Back then it was trying to emulate records I was playing, and which was obviously mainly jungle and drum and bass, but I had a lot of friends who were into grime and stuff as well. So I was making some bits like that. And later upgraded, got a PC with Reason 2.5 I believe it was at the time. And yeah, started from there and just learned more and more as the years went on.
And what was the biggest hurdle for you at the beginning? What was the most frustrating part of mixing?
Definitely hearing this amazing idea and record in my head and not being able to get anywhere close to it once I was trying to make it.
And knowing what you know now, what would you tell yourself back then in terms of mixing?
Just trust your ear, really, and get better monitors.
Yeah.
Better monitors earlier on, yeah, because I was just started off with a hi-fi speakers I had, and so you work with what you've got at the time. But yeah, I would have got better monitors earlier on.
Yeah. What are you monitoring on now?
The Focal Solo 6BE.
Same as me.
Really, yeah.
They're good.
I love the twins, but I couldn't afford them.
So
twins of it.
Yeah, and you were DJing as well, I guess. You continued to DJ as you were making music on PlayStation through Reason.
Yeah. So I was still playing. Obviously, first it was just in the bedroom, but as 17, 18, I was going on like some pirate stations and internet stations at the time that were popping up, and started to get some bookings. That was around 17, 18, I was still playing drum and bass, but starting to fade out. It sort of stagnated a bit for me. And I'd also been making, as I said, bits of grime, and I'm always really into reggae and dub. So that sort of 140 BPM thing was always, around me. And then I heard dubstep, early dubstep. I guess it was around 2007-ish, something like that. And started going out to that and really got into that for a few years. At all DMZ at Brixton, Mass, and I don't know if many people know about it, but that was it for a few years until I found a new love for house and techno.
Yeah. And
that's the journey started from there.
But I guess all of those experiences, DJing and going out, informed it inevitably.
Yeah.
Regardless of what you're trying to make.
Yeah, it's all a journey.
I'm
a big believer in progression. I love house and techno, and I feel like I found a genre that I can really bring all my influences into without feeling like I need to move into something else. But never say never. You got to flow with what feels right to you. Never confine yourself to what you're making.
Do you want to introduce what this track is, and we can just start going through it?
This is a Babylon System by myself.
I was holding a system that doesn't give a fuck about you, nor me, nor the lie. I was holding a system that doesn't give a fuck about you, nor me, nor the lie. In pharmacy, the spot back gun, put on a shotgun, last pull, spot that gun, drop down. In the I got Babylon, got nothing in.
Do they all start the same way for you? Do you have a certain plugin you always go to? Or some hardware?
This one's a bit of a weird one. I started it ages ago.
Right.
When I first started making house and techno, I sort of shied away from those more, I hate the word urban, but those more urban influences, because to me, when I was first moving into scene, it seemed like they were quite looked down on sometimes in house and techno scene. I don't know if anyone ever finds that, but when I got into early dubstep, I see it as two different sounds, really. You got the mad mid-range stuff that was coming out in the charts, but the earlier stuff was really deep and dubby and atmospheric, and that was more I was into, and I felt like I hadn't got it out of my system, really, because I never got into that scene, releasing and playing. So I wanted to try and bring that sort of influence into a house techno track. So it started off with wanting to create a bass line like that, which was dark and atmospheric, and that was basically how it started.
Yeah,
and then,
I was actually going to ask you about the bass line, because it's massive and it's very thick, and I mean, these speakers probably don't do it justice, but it does sound great. So can you talk us through how you how you made that sound?
I recorded it out through a valve compressor I've got. I skipped the compression stage, just wanted to put it through the valve. I split the bass up as well.
So you like have a crossover, I guess?
Yeah.
Low and you treat them separately?
I think because a lot of people layer basses, you know, you might use a sine for the sub and then have a mid or a top. But I found, I do it sometimes, but mostly I found I like creating one sound and one synth and then processing it a lot and using multiband processing, and in this case I split it up and just EQ'd, you know, rolled off the bottom end and done slightly different processing on the top end of it. So I now just found that I don't glue as well when you use a sub and different synths.
So if you use separate sounds to represent each frequency range?
Yeah,
well,
yes, it depends. Sometimes it can, sometimes it can't. But I always find if I make it on one plugin or from one source and then process it differently, it normally sounds a lot better for me. Here's the bass. So we've got two layers. This is the top layer. It's been processed slightly differently. Both it's made in Trillion, as people know Trillion. It's a sample-based synthesizer. It's like hybrid because it's sample-based, all recorded from analog synthesizers, but then you can process them and filter after. The reason I love Trillion, the filters are amazing. So I use a Mini Moog Sawtooth wave. Didn't process it much. It was all about the filter. I was tweaking the filter for weeks, just here and there, and not non-stop, but I'd hear it and go, I wasn't happy with it, and go back. And
would you automate that, or is it static once you've set it?
It's static once I've set it, yeah. You know, you can automate, but I just didn't in this case. I was happy where the settings were. But tweaking the envelope and the actual filter types, you can open it up, and they've got all these different types of filter sounds they've emulated from obviously real filters in the real world. And tweaking that was the main thing about this sound. It's all in the filter, the fatness, everything. That fat boy mode it really is fat. Quite resonant. Quite resonant. It might not be the right sort of sound you're looking for. It's really, really resonant, but it just really does make it fat. And later for the low end, a bit of EQ in. I always find low mids always cause a problem, get a bit muddy, so you have to cut some things out there. Multiband compression on the Wave C4.
And that's just the sub?
That's just the top end, yeah. And the low end, it hasn't got that little bit of mid-range. And only had the delay on the mid-range one, because I didn't want delays on the lows, muddying it up. So, on this one, I've got compression. Probably, what's that, around, there you go, 4.1, about 4 dB. Slow attack, because I wanted that punch to come through, so I had a slow attack, shorter release. Oh, you can see I probably went a bit crazy there, trying to get tiny little resonances out, and I spent a while on this track, I'll get to that later, but I probably went a bit overboard, which can be a slippery slope sometimes. But then basically both of these, I've sent the high end one and the low end to a bus. I've got the R bass from Waves, which is a sub-harmonic, what would you call it? Sub-harmonic exciter.
It's kind of a synthesizer in the sense. Does it generate sine waves, or does it just enhance them?
I'm not sure how it works, to be honest. It's like an exciter. It degenerates them, but obviously using the existing source and where obviously the frequencies lay. So, but it really does. If I take it back, I don't know if you'll hear it on these speakers, but if I turn it off, turn it on, it just gives a bit of that low end. In the club, you'll really notice it.
And would you take out the low mid before it hits that, so that doesn't enhance those?
No, I'll just add.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll just add extra harmonics onto what's there. But in the club, that can really make it punt like on the low end. Yeah. So you feel it. I like feeling it in my chest. And coming from jungle and stuff, so it was all about the sub bass, wasn't it? So I can never get away from that, really.
Yeah.
So one turmoil I found myself when I first started making house and techno is either making the choice between a big kick and a big bass, because a lot of techno, it's all the bass is in the kick, and big long tails, and it completely fills up the low end, which I do with others as well. But I did start trying to do both, and it just doesn't work. So you got to make room for one.
Would you just decide that at the beginning of the mix process?
Yeah, once I got down to, it depends where I start. Sometimes I start with like atmospheres and pads and chords, and if depending whether it's like this or more legato bass, sometimes I'll have a bigger kick and use side chaining and stuff. Where on this I didn't really use too much side chaining.
So once you had the bass sound, you were happy with it. Was it just a case of creating a rhythm around it with the drums, or did the pads come next?
Some people write everything and then wait for all the mixing at the end, but I'll do it as I go through because the sound design and the mixing of those sounds for me are part of the writing and creative process. I've got the sounds in my head. I have to get them down before I feel like I can move on and build other parts and write other parts around it. But yeah, early on I had the bass. Then I started making the drums. They just didn't groove right with the track and have the right feel. I completely changed them halfway through. Then I was happy, and I got to this point.
So where do you usually get your drums from?
I use sample packs, and I use battery, the drum rack in Ableton. But the samples, I really love the Gold Baby.
Yeah.
They're recorded through great recording chains, and for me, like I was talking about album gear, I know a lot about it. I don't own much, but I've read a lot about it, so I know how important the recording chain
when you get it
can be.
Like,
Yeah.
And you said you mix as you go. How did you process the drums in this track? Because the clap especially is very tight and crisp and good.
Yeah, there's an 808 snare. What happened was, early on, I had a few references in my mind, which I do sometimes. Sometimes I might have 2 or 3 tunes. I think I'm like, that from that, and I'd love to try to, I think they'll fit in this track. So I'll listen, and there was an old 80s track by Club Neveu. I can't remember the name of what actual one it was now. And the 808s were lovely, really, really nice. So I was referencing that. I think I made a separate session, just worked on just getting this 808 snare tight as possible. Never EQ'd it too much. I probably made a bump somewhere around the top mids, find a sweet spot there, and the rest I would have cut some of the low mids maybe, and parallel compression, stuff like that. That's the main one that I made in that session. Then I'll bounce an audio file, and that's what I've got here. So I can't show you the full chain, that one, unfortunately, but I did process it more after. More compression, 6-to-1, short attack. It's probably coming through too much, the initial attack. Roll off some low end.
When you're doing those notch EQs, is that you're looking for frequencies?
Yeah, I'd sweep through. I don't know if many people do this, I'm familiar with it. I'd normally sweep right through and find frequencies I don't like. Sometimes I'll hear something that catches my ear and I'll go and look for it, but sometimes I'll just sweep through and find parts I don't like and just notch little bits out. So that's probably, when you see loads of little ones like that, that's probably what I've been doing.
Yeah.
So another EQ, don't ask me why I've done it in 2 different ones, a bit more again. Again, this is probably me spending too much time on this tune. And then one of the Ableton saturators, which always is quite nice just to put on any drums really, I think. But I also use another one, the D16, is it Decimator?
Yeah. It's like a bit crusher.
Yeah, it's like a bit crusher. I'll use that on a lot of drums just to give it a bit of crunch and grit. But I've got another 808, like clap, snare kind of sound. And that adds more of the body, I guess, to this snare. So that's them separate. Together. Well, you can hear some clicks coming in now as well. There are clicks in the track, which were a massive problem. Later on, I sent them to a friend of mine from Hamburg, Monte. I don't know if you know him. Amazing like, mixing engineer, but obviously amazing producer as well. I'd always send my tracks to him for his ear and advice, and I had some crazy transients on the clicks that I just never picked up on myself. So he advised me to get rid of those. A lot of people always make their tracks really neat and colour code them and name them, and I didn't want to do that today because I wanted to stay true to the chaos that I normally produce in. I never organise anything, I just remember where things are. All right, shakers. I don't do too much processing on hi-hats, shakers and percussion and stuff. Normally just EQ, probably rolling off low end, yeah. And finding a little sweet spot. 808s, just straight, no processing there. That's Gold Baby. Super analog 808. Brilliant, it's round robin samples. So would have sampled the same sound at the 808 8 times. And So every time I'm triggering it, it's cycling through them, so it just sounds more.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah,
so even though it's the same velocity,
yeah.
it's just a different.
Well, actually, in battery, there's actually a part in it where you can humanize section. Also, on each cell, for each sample, you can actually make it random for the volume, velocity, and I normally tweak those just tiny bit, just to give it a bit more of a real sound. Because I'm lazy and I can't bother to go through each note and actually change the velocities myself. I've seen people do that, but I'll just get a bit lazy there. Battery's good for that. This is in Guru, another one. I've stopped using this so much now, but it's actually got a step sequencer inside it, which, coming from Reason, the drum machine in there has a step sequencer, and I've got really used to that. So I did miss it for a while, so I started using this, but I've got used to not using it again. That's the tambourines. Again, just EQ, a bit of a boost in a sweet spot. I'll pound around a bit as well, I don't know if you can see that. Left, right, left. The other extra 808's coming later on the offbeat. That was later on in the track. I wanted to add some extra groove and excitement, try to lift it a bit. So there's quite a few different bits going on in the drums. But it's the overall drum bus. Everything gets routed to a bus in the end. And I've got the glue by Cytomic. I love that. Really, really good gluing compressor. Always have that on my drum bus, and normally on the master chain while I'm making the track as well.
Yeah, that's actually in Ableton now.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, but I still use the proper one because I've just got used to the interface and everything. Big fan of Sound Toys. I use their stuff quite a bit. And this is, crunch. This is basically distortion and compression. Just the tiniest bit if you see on the mix, it's near zero. The tiniest bit, which I do use in my master chain as well sometimes. I'm sure people will be frowning at that right now, but I have.
Master bus distortion.
Yeah. More saturation in Ableton. Filters, which are automated here and there.
So just DJ style, like cuts? And
Yeah, low cuts. Probably a high cut as well later on towards the outro of the track. I actually bring the low end and the top end out, so just to give it a nice tail out. And a limiter. Tiniest bit, like 1 dB maybe. Again, worrying about transients and RMS and peak, worrying about that. But that's the main kick. You won't see any MIDI parts because actually when I was using Guru, I was actually just automating on and off, and rather than dropping the MIDI parts in.
That's a lot of plugins.
Always in my kicks, I really probably over-process them. A lot of people lay their kicks. I have in this track, but sometimes I don't, and I use a isotope alloy. It's really, really good. They've got some presets in there for pulling transients out of the actual sample you've got. Because I always find in house and techno, you do need a bit of a click at the top end to cut through sometimes. So, but I've got isotope trash here. This is an important one. Parallel kick fattener, as I've called it. So on this chain, I've got just the original dry source coming through. And on this chain, you can hear it's just a tiny bit of low end pulling it. Basically what I've done is I've got the API 2500 in waves, and
It's a compressor.
heavily compressed it. And the Puke Tech, this is a technique I actually saw online on YouTube, online tutorial. It's an old technique they used to use in studios, like recording studios, with these two, to pull out the towel. So basically, it's basically heavily compressed and then almost bandpassed around 60 hertz, 50 hertz. Find a sweet spot. Heavily compress your kick with a high ratio. So it's almost squashed basically, so you really bring out the towel and then boost around 50, 60 hertz or band pass and add that underneath just to pull the towel out basically, and some of the bass. I just type ozone, rolling off some of the sub. So I've rolled off from around 50 and then boosted just above that to give it its own space around the kick, around the bass, sorry. Decimalt, D16 Decimalt. High quality bit crusher. This is really great for add in a bit of grit, a body, and you can really go extreme with this and try to emulate some of the old drum machines and samplers people used to use, like the Emus and Acai's and...
It's got an MPC preset.
Yeah, it's got an
as well,
MPC preset. It basically brings the sample rate down and the bit rate. You can probably show you. But I didn't want to go too old school on this. Oh, that's loads of reverb coming in there. Sorry about that.
I was wondering what
Still
that
running
was.
through the track. Yeah, I wasn't sure then either. But it's really, really good. This, as I use it quite subtly. I've left the bit depth as it is, and the frequency where it is, and I just drive through the preamp section up here. That's it. Just add a bit of grit. Here we go. Isotope Alloy 2. This is where I've brought in the old transient designer to add some click. Tiniest amount, but to help it cut through in the mix. And again, a filter. Extra body, top end for the kick. I don't feel I've done much there. No, a bit of EQing, and obviously rolled off the low end on a few samples with more going on in the mid and top end. But yeah, I think that's about it for drums.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to talk about here, and we are like moving on in time.
Yeah, I don't want to.
I think the vocal in itself. I mean, was the vocal a sample? Was that something that you recorded yourself? Because it's got a really interesting tone.
Yeah, it was a sample. So I'd always wanted to use this particular vocal. So I went on Discogs, bought the vinyl. I couldn't find, again, wanting perfection and the best audio quality. I did find like an MP3 of it, but no way I could use that in a track I could actually release. So I found the vinyl, recorded it through my audio interface. We had an acapella on the vinyl, and then processed it and cut it up. And as I used one line as the hook, I probably processed this quite a lot, but I actually recorded it, bounced it down to audio because the CPU limitations. You can't see much signal on it because I actually recorded it. That's probably, actually at the time, I didn't know too much about through your chain, actually keeping your volume at good levels.
Like signal, yeah, signal.
Yeah, the signal chain and keeping the volume at good levels. So actually on this track at the time, things were recorded and being mixed quite low. So at the end, I had to boost the levels on the master chain with the limiter and stuff. I don't think it affected it in the end because, you know, they're 32-bit audio. And I recorded the vocal in 32-bit and stuff, so hopefully it wasn't affected, the quality. But yeah, that's why you can't see no signal. So I cut the vocal up. In the intro, used a few bits. This is the hook, which is like the chorus. Got reverb, delay, you can see on the being automated up here. 2C Aether, the main reverb there, which is a great reverb plugin. Really like that. And I've got Audio Damage dub station using the delay tails there. This is just like a widening plugin, just to widen it out so it wasn't straight down the middle with the vocal. See, before I recorded this, I probably had automation on the volume to keep the volume of the vocal steady before compressing it. And here I have SPL Vitalizer, which is a great little plugin I use sometimes. When I recorded the vocal from the vinyl, it obviously lost some top end coming from vinyl in the first place. It was also 33 RPM rather than 45 RPM. So there just wasn't that detail in the top end. So I've used this to add some, it's basically an exciter, to add some top end in. Yeah, AP 560, the EQ, and Aphex Vintage, again, more another exciter to really just boost the vocal. It was really dull, to be honest, when I recorded it from the vinyl. I don't know whether it was the final stem they put on the vinyl, whether it was the actual original unprocessed vocal, because it didn't sound great. Yeah, and then later on in the track, there's the... This bit is like a verse I wanted to put in, and basically this, I cut up loads of different lines in the track and basically made a brand new verse. My favourite lines, basically. If you listen to the original, you won't find that part. OPX Pro. There is the Arturia Oberheim, but at the time I did have both, but I just preferred this. So you can see here, 2 saw waves. The filter is doing most of the work, and the loudness envelope, I'm getting that plucky sort of sound. And I'll play it in isolation so you can hear. So I mean, it sounds like well, it basically is an arpeggio, but I did write the notes in myself. Yeah, it took a while to find that perfect melody. I wanted something that just sounded different, you know, and a bit eerie and dark. I mean, the scale we're in is a minor scale, so. Rolling off bottom end, always roll off bottom end on most things if it's not needed. More notches. Compression, where it's quite a plucky sound, again, worrying about too much transients coming through, so a bit of compression to level it all out. And then we go to this bus, loads more processing. The glue, the TG12412 is another EQ.
Yeah.
Like an old vintage emulation exciter, just a tiny bit on the top end. This is probably the long tail you can hear. Is it? No, this is a short one. Sometimes I put reverbs on the actual channel rather than on. I actually maxed out the Ableton. You're limited to how many send and returns you can have. So that's probably why I started putting them on the channel. So I tend to do that quite a lot. Never happy with just one reverb. And we have like 4 different ones, and you got your delays and whatever else. Another reverb. So they're actually working together. 4% on that, 10% on that. I spent a long time working on the reverb on this. Where it's such a short, plucky sound, but I still wanted the depth and atmosphere to fill up the track. Without the reverb, it just sounded crap.
The master bus, I mean, you talked a lot about RMS and peak and making sure peaks don't get through.
Yeah.
Are you processing the master bus here, or do you leave that for mastering?
What I normally do, while I'm creating on the master bus, there's nothing on this, so I'll delete it later on, but I'll show you in a second my actual master chain. Normally I'll just have a glue compressor and a limiter, but not doing anything, you know, just to protect my speakers if everything happens. Sometimes I start getting bored and I'll start just throwing. Sometimes I just throw stuff on the master chain just for fun, really. You know, you got to remember, you still got to have fun making music. It isn't just all about the process and paint by numbers. You know, I've got some chains I've saved as like presets that I do, but I will put stuff on and I will send it to the master engineer with some stuff. What I normally do is I'll make my own master, maybe to test out and send to some of my friends, like the DJs, see what they think, and then when it comes to sending to the master engineer, I'll roll some of them off. I've done the EQs, sometimes I'll back them off a bit. Like if I had plus 6 dB, I'll roll it off to maybe only 2 dB. But as you can see here, I've got a low EQ, linear, just rolling off some of the low end, probably below 30 hertz. Glue compressor, don't ask me why I've got 2. I wouldn't do that now. Isotope ozone. I really like this. As you can see, look, you can see where I've actually rolled it off here. It's a good example. Equalizer, harmonic exciter, multiband. I really love the ozone. It's really, really great for just adding a bit of sheen and filling out the harmonic content. Stereo imaging, widen up the mids a bit, some of the top end, but I've rolled that off around 50% and actually make the below 140 hertz more mono, so it translates better in the club. I do roll off top end quite a lot. So coming from DJing and vinyl and stuff, I can find, you know, digital tracks can just have too much top end and on systems when it's really loud. So I always tend to roll off just gently around 15,000 hertz, which most people can't hear above anyway. So PSP, Neon, HR, Equalizer. Again, I'd really like this on the master bus, just to add a tiny bit on the low end. And I've done this notch, but mainly just, I'll never notch away with this. So it's like adding just a tiny bit. With that fat button turned on, it just seems just really fatten up the low end. Yeah. And I've got the camel fat there, which is like a distortion effects, multi-effects plugin. That's just right at the end on the outro. I've used that. And Fab Filter. I use Fab Filters a lot, as you've seen, the Pro Q, the Pro C, and the Pro L. This was to get levels to where the master engineer would be happy. Minus 16 dB, I guess, most sound engineers like to be sent stuff at. So if you can not have a limiter on the master and have your track at around that volume, you'll probably be, and there's no clipping anywhere else, you'll probably have a good fidelity in your mix. So.
Yeah.
But that's it, yeah.
I was